في المجتمعات المعاصرة ويستعرض الفرص والتحديات التي تواجهها. السيدات والسادة الكرام، تواجه المرأة المسلمة في المجتمعات الإسلامية وغير الإسلامية المعاصرة مزيجاً من الفرص والتحديات، ويبرز التحدي الأكبر والأكثر قسوة فيما تواجهه أمهاتنا وأخواتنا في غزة الآن. وأي تحد يمكن مواجهته أكبر من أن تحرم هؤلاء النساء من حقهن في الحياة؟ إلى جانب هذا التحدي، لا يمكن كذلك إنكار حقيقة التقدم الذي تم إحرازه في المجالات التعليمية والمهنية، ومع ذلك لا تزال هناك تحديات مثل الصورة النمطية وعدم المساواة في الحقوق الاقتصادية والاجتماعية وبعض القيود الثقافية الناجمة عن السياسات والقوانين التمييزية التي لا تراعى أو لا تراعي المبادئ والقيم الراسخة في الإسلام. ولمناقشة مختلف هذه القضايا يسعدني أن أقدم المتحدثة الأولى في هذه الجلسة، وهي معالي السيدة حنة رباني، أول سيدة باكستانية تتولى منصب وزيرة الخارجية بجمهورية باكستان الإسلامية. شغلت سابقاً منصب وزير الدولة للشؤون الخارجية ووزير الدولة للسياسات الاقتصادية، عضو في البرلمان الباكستاني، حاصلة على الماجستير في إدارة الأعمال، وهي متحدثة دولية في العلاقات الدولية. تستعرض في هذه الجلسة المرأة المسلمة في المجال الدبلوماسي، التحديات والفرص. تفضلي دكتورة. تفضل.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum to everyone. It is truly my great pleasure and honor to be here today amidst all of you. It is also, I want to take this opportunity to thank for the Kingdom and its leadership for convening a forum to talk about women in Islam at a time when many women in Islam are suffering through brutal violence as we speak. Brothers and sisters, ladies and gentlemen, as someone who has been a practitioner of diplomacy, hailing from a Muslim country, representing a Muslim country, I am someone who believes in diplomacy. I am someone who believes in the power of humanity and how that drives us. I'm someone who also would like to believe in the power of the OIC. Therefore, what I want to say today is perhaps going to be based more on the reality of the world that we have in front of us and the challenges of being able to do diplomacy effectively in such strained times, rather than talk or celebrate the many achievements that women across Islam have been able to make. But before I do that, I do want to say that I think the Muslim world has much to explain for allowing the status of women that was given to women by Islam in the very beginning of Islam, by Prophet Muhammad, may peace be upon him, himself, through his life, through the life of his dear wife, Hazrat Khadija, how we have allowed Islam, or in the status that Islam gave to women, to be taken away through culture, norms, and barriers which were created by men, which had nothing to do with Islamic injunctions. And I think we have much to explain. As we have Ms. Fatima Gilani sitting over here, who was the spokesperson of the Mujahideen, in 30 years back, how do we explain what is happening in Afghanistan today in the name of Islam? I say do whatever you want to do, but do not exploit my religion, a religion that gave women izzat, as we call it, give women its stature. Do not use Islam to explain your bigotry against women, and do not take opportunities away from women in the name of Islam. But as we sit here, or as I stand here, I think what we're seeing is the unleashing of a greater wrong which is being done using the shrouds of all the right words. What we see happening in the world today is perhaps the falling of our common humanity, and the belief in humanity perhaps will be taken away. As I said, as someone who believes in the power of diplomacy, I think diplomacy today is suffering through its worst moments in history. Because diplomacy is supposed to be the art of the impossible, the art of finding solutions, the art of going and helping against violence, the art of being able to propel human values in a way which can be useful and which is there to support the weak and not strengthen the violent. In today's world, what we're seeing is remarkable, and perhaps nothing else explains it better than the words of the Secretary General of the United Nations. I think we may agree or disagree with any institution, but there's no country in the world which would disagree with the Charter of the UN, or which would say outrightly that they do not believe in the Charter of the UN. When the United Nations Secretary General tells us, and I quote him, Gaza is becoming a graveyard for children, hundreds of girls are reportedly being killed or injured every day. More journalists have been killed in the last 4 weeks period than any other conflict, at least in the last 3 decades. More UN aid workers have been killed than in any comparable period in the history of our organization. And by our organization, he's referring to the United Nations. Ladies and gentlemen, I think it is compelling upon all of us to really ask ourselves the question that how have we created a world order in which we sit and see this on our television screens and try and justify it, and then veto-wielding countries continue to use their veto not only to allow a country to continue the violence and genocide, but also to veto even humanitarian pauses. Can we even call it a fair world order? Forget fair, can we even call it order of any form? As I said, if diplomacy is reduced to finding justification to allow the perpetuation of war in language which is shrouded in peace, then we can say that none of us will believe in diplomacy anymore. We have experienced violence at a scale which is unprecedented. And we have seen its justifications in language which is taken from the UN Charter itself. We have seen the justification of genocide and portrayed it as a quest for peace. I share with you some remarkable quotes that I find remarkable in many, many ways, because as we see this happening, we have one of the most important countries in the world tell us that it is now in the darkest moment that we must fight hardest to preserve a path for stability, security, opportunity, integration, prosperity, and peace, not tomorrow, not after this war, but today. And it is the same country which has vetoed singularly humanitarian pauses and ceasefire as we speak. We all know by now that thousands and thousands of people in Gaza are being killed every day. Children are being killed with impunity, and this impunity has been given by the world order itself. We are told that these are intractable disputes. You know, the region that I come from also, we are told that these are intractable disputes. Kashmir is an intractable dispute. Palestine is an intractable dispute. These are not intractable disputes. These are disputes which have been made intractable by us providing shelter to those that we should be condemned for their violence and for the use. These are intractable because exceptions from world order and from institutional prowess have been given to these because they happen to be in one camp or the other. I think what we see today is that the world is not only falling apart, but our belief in common humanity is also falling apart. And the only ray of hope that we perhaps see is not from the leaders of the world. The leaders of the world are perhaps involved in the perpetuation of war, but from the youth that is emerging, both from Muslim countries and non-Muslim countries. From the youth that is saying it is no more acceptable to use the language of peace to perpetuate war. And it is perhaps impossible for us in this time to celebrate the many successes that we might have had in the Muslim world pertaining to women, the country that we are sitting in right now, or standing in right now, where I'm standing right now. Yesterday I was out on the streets and it was wonderful to see women drive. And then I asked myself the question that how wonderful is it, but is it a right that has to be given to women? Is it, so it's interesting how we have allowed many, and therefore I think it is something to celebrate as to how the doors of opportunity are opening for women in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. In my backyard, or in my vicinity of where I come from, as those doors of opportunity close to the Afghan women, I think it is absolutely correct for Muslim countries to ask of the Afghan government as to who has given them the right to close the door of opportunity exclusively for women, and to use it as a tool for social cohesion, so to speak. To weaponize the freedom that is granted by God to women, to weaponize that for social cohesion and for political ends. For too long, political ends have been met by the strangulation of women and their rights. And till the time that we continue to justify one behavior after the other, I think we will not be able to move forward. And I can tell you this with full assurance and confidence of someone who has been on the sidelines of, and sometimes in the mainstream of diplomacy for the last 20 years, that the state of the world today is, when history is written, we will be condemned as the worst people or generation which enabled violence, extermination, genocide, and used words of security, protection, and human rights to protect violence, extermination, genocide. And if we continue to sit and watch this on our TV screens unfold, this tragedy unfold, and are able to only reduce ourselves to making speeches about it, history will condemn us and history will judge us. I think it is time that we move away from just condemnations. We need to show through our actions what is it that we are capable of. And if the answer is that we are capable of nothing, then I think we should stop telling the Palestinian people that they are not alone, and let them know that they have been alone for a very, very long time. And let them know that we will allow their extermination and their genocide to be explained through the UN Charter. And let them know perhaps that, like George Orwell said, some animals are equal, but some are more equal than others, that in the UN Charter we can make a change and say all humans are equal, but some humans are more equal than others. It is time that we start making diplomacy function. Diplomacy has been reduced to using a lot of words to end up saying absolutely nothing, so that we don't leave a mark. So we are able to not seen to be against anyone. I think it is important that we stand up and say that we are against genocide, we are against extermination, and we are also against those countries which are playing an active role in its perpetuation, which are authorizing this as we speak. I have read to you statements. I know that all of us in this room are aware of the dozens of times that veto power has been used to give coverage to Israeli settlements, to give coverage to Israeli genocide, to give coverage to Israeli extermination. And this is not, let me say this out loud, a question of anti-Semitism. I think there are many Jews which are rising up and speaking against this because they believe in common values, as so we must. All of us must believe in common values. We are not. I also think it is about time that the Muslim world is also able to wake up to the reality of the fact that we have allowed Islam to be explained by actions of entities such as Al-Qaeda and have been purely and fully put on the defensive. That is not Islam by any means. It is the absolute opposite of Islam. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, as we go further, I do want to just talk about briefly, perhaps, about the challenges and the opportunities that exist in the world as we face perhaps one of the most grotesque chapters of human history. You know what is grotesque about it is perhaps that it is being enabled by countries who claim to protect and who are in fact the architects of the human rights architecture, who are in fact the architects of the developmental architecture. So it is not countries which are seen to be extremist countries or countries which are seen to be, oligarchical countries or countries which are seen to be dictatorial countries which are enabling this. It is countries which profess belief in democratic values and human rights which are becoming enablers. I think it is important that our common humanity is able to come and start speaking the truth and being able to find common solutions rather than perpetuate violence and dispute. As I said, I think it is also perhaps important to talk about some of the challenges and some of the opportunities that exist today. I think the biggest challenge, and I've said this enough, and I probably at the cost of repetition would say this again, that it is important that we are not able to weaponize the human rights agenda and the developmental agenda and the democratic agenda to explain this violence, this extermination, this genocide. It is also important that we are able to close the biggest challenge is to close the credibility gap that exists all over the world when they see these actions or the perpetuation of this. It is important also for us to make sure that this is not the end of our common humanity, that is, that we are able to see some commonality of values. The opportunity that exists is that what we call universal values can only be universal values if they are universally applied. If they're applied to those who are residing in the Arab world in the same way to those who are residing in the European world. It is also an important opportunity that we are able to listen to the calls of the young and the youth, be it in the streets of New York, Washington, D.C., or in the Arab streets. I think the youth is giving us a very important message, and the message is that they will not take this anymore, that they will not take our explaining of violent extremist methods through language which is shrouded, as I said, and veiled in human rights and in democratic rights and in the fight for the right, that they will not stand for it anymore. And as we do that, I think it is important to understand that some of the explanations that are given, such as self-defense, have already been catered for in 2005 by the ICJ, as to whether that, according to the UN Charter, is explained or not. Every UN body is right now telling us that this is one of the worst moments in human history. When the UN bodies that we have created ourselves and that we believe in are telling us that something is happening, we cannot afford to look away. And I think in this time when there is very little to celebrate, let us celebrate some people who are standing up. I want to mention over here Craig Mochiber, the director of the New York office of the UNHCR, the UN High Commission for Human Rights, who resigned on 28th of October, and his words were that this is a textbook genocide where the intent is not hidden but is actually celebrated. I think it is really a moment of reckoning for the Muslim world and for the non-Muslim world, because if this continues, our belief in commonality of human values, our belief in humanity, and will no more be there. Even more importantly, the order, the world order that we talk about, which has already fragmented in front of our eyes, I don't think there will be any order left to be seen. And we will, as we already are perhaps, going into a fast train wreck in a world which is reckless, which is disorderly, where each one will be able to do, whoever has the military might will be able to attack and explain it all through the UN Charter. So I would just want to end over here by saying that Islam has always been a religion of peace. I think it is about time that we are able to take the explaining of Islam away from those people who have taken our religion, hijacked our religion, and made it out to be different. I think it is important for us to stop being defensive of the values that Islam has inculcated. Islam was the first religion which went against female infanticide. Islam had the Prophet, may peace be upon him, wife who was the trader and the earner for the family. How far away from those principles of Islam have we come? And as we see all of these women sitting over here, and the women in the streets of Saudi Arabia, the women in the streets of other countries, my own country, where one of our prime ministers was the most celebrated woman, Benazir Bhutto, all over the world. She fought for her rights. She fought for not only for her rights, but the rights of not only Muslim women, but the people of Pakistan for democracy. We have enough examples, and I know enough of this has been celebrated, so I thought I would perhaps talk about how, as a woman who has been sometimes in the forefront, sometimes on the sidelines of diplomacy, I feel that diplomacy should no longer be used to explain violence, extermination, and genocide. Diplomacy is an effective tool to put a stop to that. We should not exploit and weaponize diplomacy to normalize extermination, genocide, and the killing of innocent people, men, women, and children, as we speak. And we cannot, as humanity, sit here and just experience it silently. At the very least, speak about it. But I think it is within our power as countries, not only Muslim countries, but all countries who believe in the commonality of human values, to start at least calling a spade, to start calling out people who are explaining this, and to try and use